Okay, now that it's 3 months later, I'm going to pick back up on this transmission, and I noticed that this nut's loose, so I'm going to have to bang that locking tab off and then clean this real good and tighten it up, put some red Loctite on it and put it back together. So here we go. This nut ends up being 7/8. I didn't have any problems with any of this, so I'm not going to take the spring off and take it apart. I have another video showing all this if you look down in my videos. My main objective here is to get these threads nice and clean so I can put some red Loctite on them. Okay, now you can see I cleaned the threads real good, got all the oil off of them on the shaft and on the nut. Now I'm going to put a dab of the red Loctite on the nut. I'm going to put a dab on the threads. Now you got to remember to put the locking tab back on, and then the nut. Now that's not loose. My pedal's still nice and free. Now I'll bend the locking tab back over. Once I get it started, I find the best way is to come in with a pair of pliers if you can, and just bend it up. And there's what that looks like, up nice and tight on it. So now I'll install this onto the transmission. This is the rod that goes across the transmission. It goes from the clutch housing on this side over to the throw-out bearing. You can see this is a little different, but it works. It goes into the throw-out bearing just like that. So what I do is I thread this through. These fingers are what this throw-out bearing has to go onto, and it has to go onto this cutout right here. So I just kind of set it back in there like that. Make sure it's on those fingers like that. It's right on those fingers. And now you feed this whole piece on. It's a little tricky. Kind of leave my fingers up in there and guide it in. And then sometimes you have to take and move the shifter like that. And you heard it just come right on. Now before I put all the nuts on to hold it on in place like you're supposed to, I just put a couple on and then check to make sure everything's right. And I don't even put the lock washers on them at this point. So right now I have 3 nuts on. It doesn't really matter where. I have one here, and one at the bottom. They're kind of triangulated. I want to make sure my throw-out bearing's right, and the way I go about that is I push the lever in. Then I make sure that this travels. This is where the clutch arm goes on here and it comes across, but I turn that and I make sure that my push rod comes out, and then I push it back in, make sure this goes in. If it's not lined up right, this won't happen. Then you just give it a little turn, make sure it's nice and free, and it is. So now I know that I'm lined up right, and then the last thing I do is I like to give the kicker a kick and make sure it's spinning the main shaft, and you can see that's happening here. Once you get the main shaft down, you want to turn it and make sure that ratcheting gear is ratcheting. What that simulates is when the engine starts that it doesn't kick the kicker back up at you, because it disengages when the engine's running, and then when you come up, now I hear that still clicking, so I think there's something that's not right in here. I'm in neutral. Okay, so right there I have to go back in because that clutch is not completely disengaged like it's supposed to be. So I'm going to have to go back in and figure out why that is. When this kicker gear comes up like this piece right here disengages it. So when you come back up from kicking like this rides up on there and causes this gear to go in and disengage from this shaft. So what we're hearing is you're hearing it's just tapping off that. So what I'm going to do is behind here, I'm going to put this 60 thousandths thick washer. This was a fender washer and I just took a unibit through it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on here like this. And then put my gear on here on top of it like that. And then this will push my gear out and cause this to disengage further. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. I think part of the problem is this ratcheting gear has a lot of slop where the gear's moving like this. So when this lip out here pushes on it, it's pushing it cockeyed and it's just rubbing over here. So I'm going to put it back together and see what happens. I just did a quick assembly back together. I didn't put the lock nut on anything, and you can hear now I no longer have that clicking issue, and this moves free. You don't have to worry about that washer wearing because it rotates with the gear and with the kicker, so there's really going to be no wear. It's not like it's continually spinning. So when I go down like this, you can hear it still ratchets if the engine starts, and then when I go back all the way up, it's free and there's no more rattling. So that fixed it. Now I'll take it apart, put it back together the proper way. So again, this is what this looks like. The shaft's here. I'm just going to put this washer on there. I made sure I deburred the edges real good. So that's just going to go on there like that. Then the gear goes on. Make sure you get it to the right spot. Now the lock washer. Now nice dab of red Loctite. Some red again on the nut. Bring it up tight. The shaft's flush with the top of the nut there pretty much. Now I'll bend the locking tab over. Now I put the throwout bearing onto the throwout bearing finger. The easiest way to do this is to poke this rod really far out and let it start right onto the clutch. So you know you're on the clutch there. Then you just bring it in. Or then I'll get the lock washers on. So now that I have everything together, it's not hitting. The kicker moves freely. Even though these have lock washers, I still put a dab of blue Loctite on them along with the lock washer. Once I get the nuts on all of them, I'll torque them up to spec. Now that I have all the nuts on, I couldn't find any torque spec for these, so I just brought them up tight. Didn't crush down on them too hard. Make sure I didn't damage anything. Just used experience to get them where I wanted them. One of the more important things that people tend to forget is this little locking key, and it locks fourth gear into this spacer. That way they spin together in the seal, and it just goes down in here like that and locks in. So you can see now when I turn it, it all spins together. I've seen that left out quite a bit, so you don't want to leave that out. Now that the locking key's in there, I get some RTV, and I put RTV down in these gaps just to give it a little extra sealing power, if you will. Now that that's sealed up, put your sprocket on with the dish side facing the transmission to get over top of this lip that sticks out. Now this shield. Now the locking tab. Now that I have the main nut on there, I'm going to bend over a locking tab, this one here. Now I have the locking tab bent over, and that finishes this transmission. I appreciate you watching. Please don't forget to hit that like button. It only takes you a second, right down below. And subscribe. Thanks for watching. And if I can help, leave a question in the comment. I'll get back to you.